Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein, and we're joined by phone by Dr. Stephen Gaies of the University of Northern Iowa, Center of Genocide and Holocaust Education, Holocaust and Genocide Education. I keep getting it wrong. I'm sorry. And welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm sitting in a parking lot in Coralville, Iowa, but I'm with you in the room in spirit and in voice, I hope.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Stephen, why is there a Center for Holocaust and Genocide Education at the University of Northern Iowa?
Well, the simple answer is that there were people at UNI back in 2005 who felt that the university ought to do something to promote Holocaust awareness. And the original initiative was to put together a small lecture series, maybe running over a couple or 3 semesters. And from that original idea, we developed, and when I say we, I mean administrators, faculty, staff from across campus. We developed a much more ambitious 3-semester program that included film series, exhibits, lectures, concerts, other sorts of things, all dedicated to what we call the Holocaust Remembrance and Education. And that very intensive 3-semester program kept going on and on and on. And so by 2010, what had been handled by an ad hoc committee was proposed as a permanent Center for Holocaust and Genocide Education, which would serve not just the UNI community and the local community, but would have a statewide reach and would expand to include educational outreach and more formal community outreach. So those are the things that we've been doing as a center since September 2010. On-campus programming, community, and educational outreach.
Now, Stephen, UNI is known as an education school.
Right.
Yeah. And there's some component that requires the students to interact with Holocaust education.
No, I mean, the center isn't connected with any academic program or even really with any academic department. Teaching majors are required to take a human relations course, which has been around for a couple of decades. And very often in that course, they get an exposure to issues connected with the Holocaust, with other human rights crises, and with background factors such as racism and anti-Semitism and all of the other root causes of these human rights crises. But we operate independently of any academic program, which I guess is a good thing or not a good thing, depending on how you want to look at it. But the university, as the traditional teacher training institution in the state, it used to be Iowa State Teachers College, and before that it was the State Normal School, has education obviously as one of its core part of its mission. And, part of the one reason that the center was approved was because we planned on working with schools and school districts and individual teachers around the state and to kind of build Holocaust education into, as much as we could, into the preparation and ongoing development of teachers. That's a kind of long-winded answer. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Stephen, there is a special relationship now between the UNI Center and the Holocaust Museum in D.C.?
Yes. We did a workshop that was funded by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum back in June of 2011. We had close to 75 teachers from around the state who came and did a 1 day plus an evening for those who were taking it for credit. Really extended exposure to topics in Holocaust education. And we've really tried to maintain a connection with the museum because it's really such an important institution for anyone concerned with Holocaust and genocide education. And we had an opportunity this past February to participate in the first conference on Holocaust education centers, which brought together people working in museums and Holocaust education resource centers, a couple of us who were based in universities, to talk about how we could help the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in its educational outreach programs. And by virtue of our having participated in that conference, we are now an official partner of the museum, in terms of its educational outreach, and we'll be offering a very large workshop next summer of 2015, that'll be open to teachers and that they can take at no cost.
Now, Dr. Gaies, what did your center do this week for Yom HaShoah?
Well, we have worked with Sons of Jacob Synagogue in Waterloo and many years with a number of other organizations like Catholic Parishes of Waterloo, the Peace and Justice Center of the Cedar Valley, to put together an annual Holocaust Remembrance Ceremony. And just Tuesday evening, we had our 8th annual ceremony down at the Waterloo Center for the Arts, which this year was a little bit different. We did a somewhat abbreviated ceremony that included all of the traditional components, memorial candle lighting, number of other things. We always try to include music. And then we showed a film that I know has been shown elsewhere in Iowa, the film Nicky's Family, about Sir Nicholas Winton, the rescuer of 669 children from Czechoslovakia in the months before the beginning of World War II. A very inspirational film that really makes the point that the most meaningful way to remember the Holocaust is to engage ourselves in good work on behalf of other people, no matter who they are or where they live or what their needs may be. So it was a very well-attended ceremony. Some years we've had as many as 230, 240 people. Other years it's been a little bit smaller attendance, but I know that we were one of at least three other ceremonies. You had I understand, a very successful one in Des Moines, and I know there was one in the Quad Cities, and there's one every year out in Sioux City. So there may have been others. I'm not aware of them.
Stephen, do you know anything about the ceremonies in Sioux City?
Well, I know that the uncle of a former student of mine is the person who's organized something each year, and I actually just got an email this morning that they had a Holocaust survivor speak at their ceremony, and I'm not sure exactly when it was. But I do know, not from direct experience, but I do know that they have had something just about every year, if not every year. And Mark, maybe you want to say something about the network that we're trying to create to make just this kind of communication and information exchange better. Our Iowa Council for Holocaust Education.
Well, thank you. As a result of attention being given to the construction at the state capitol of the Iowa Holocaust Memorial, we thought it was a good idea to build a statewide advisory organization that would bring teachers and professors and lay people together to brainstorm on how best to keep alive educational efforts in the area of Holocaust education. I think we've succeeded in putting together a very fine group of individuals across the state. And this is a new effort within this particular year, but I think it's bearing fruit little by little. Stephen, you're basically the chairperson of this organization.
Well, you're doing all the heavy lifting, Mark. So I always talk about you as being the chair of this council.
But we are co-facilitators of it, and some of the people involved are several professors. Yourself, Harry Broad from University of Northern Iowa.
Right.
Certainly Professor Dan Reynolds and Harold Kazimov from Grinnell College, and Professor Dorothy Pizarski from Drake University, in addition to individuals like Rabbi Kaufman here, Fred Lorber, a Holocaust survivor from the Des Moines area, Terry Toppler, a teacher and intern of some sort with the Holocaust Museum in 2005.
A teaching fellow, I think.
A teaching fellow. Various groups of people, more numerous than that, because they're situated all across the state, who have contributed their ideas and some of their time to conceptualizing how we can best make an impact on Holocaust education. And one of these people is Stephanie Rosenberg-Wager. Stephen, did you know Stephanie before she came on the board?
Well, I only knew her because she took that workshop that actually the three of us were involved in back in November of 2011
yes.
at the
temple.
At Rabbi Kaufman's temple. The Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines was, big sponsor of that event, and I came down from UNI, and Fred Lorber sort of mesmerized the teachers with an account of his experiences before and after the war. So that's where I met Stephanie. She was, I guess at that time, a teacher who came to the workshop, and now, of course, she's in the Iowa Department of Education. It's very good to have someone with an interest in Holocaust education, on the inside, so to speak.
Yes. So the concern was not only to build some of these workshops locally here in Des Moines, but to spur interest in the local communities for either replicating or doing something similar, or even on their own in the various parts of the state.
Right.
Now, Stephen, how many parts of the state do you think we can touch?
All of them.
All of them, yeah.
Some of them perhaps more easily than others, but because the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Education at UNI is, I don't want to say in a probationary period, but any new center has to demonstrate that it can do and it will do what it said it would do when the proposal was first sent forward to create a center. We've made it a point to offer workshops in various locations. Des Moines, of course, we offered one down at the Putnam Museum in Davenport in conjunction with the Anne Frank exhibit. We've been working every year with the Geographical Alliance of Iowa, which is also based at UNI, to offer a workshop on geography, conflict, and human rights. And we've offered that at UNI. We offered it down in Eldridge, Iowa, which is the far eastern part of the state. This summer, this July, we're offering it out in Sioux City. And we're already talking about offering it in 2015 someplace in central Iowa. So, yeah, I think it's important to make these workshops available to teachers and members of the public, because the workshops are available to everyone, people from faith-based communities, to make it available around the state. I always say that we want to have the CHG wants to have its footprint, in every part of the state, and I mean that. It's important for us to be in every part of the state, and there are people to work with in every part of the state.
Now, I'm interested particularly in Sioux City since it's geographically remote. Who are your contacts there, and how has that gone?
Well, we haven't done a workshop there yet. We will be doing one July 14th and 15th. Again, it's called Geography, Conflict, and Human Rights, and we typically draw both social studies educators as well as language arts educators. The logistical work is being done by the Geographic Alliance of Iowa, so I can't really tell you who the contact people are, but once we do a workshop, we build a kind of little network, and presumably we'll get some teachers who want to be part of the Iowa Council for Holocaust Education, or get connected in some other way to people like yourselves who are already on board with the importance of this kind of educational effort.
Now, Dr. Gaies, we've talked primarily about Holocaust education. What does the center do dealing with genocide in general, dealing with genocide in Africa, dealing with Bosnia, things like that?
Yeah, well, in terms of workshops, one of the real inspirations is Rabbi Kaufman's work with Sudanese and South Sudanese expatriate communities. That really provided the momentum for us to offer a workshop last May, just about a year ago, again at Temple B'nai Yeshurun on Sudan and its conflicts, and we think that's important. That original program that we came up with back in 2006 and 2007, the Holocaust Remembrance and Education, was formally expanded in 2009 to include genocide education. That was a very deliberate choice to expand our efforts to encompass something broader than the Holocaust itself. So we did that one workshop on Sudan and its conflicts. We're in the planning stages of offering a workshop for teachers and, again, members of the general public that will focus on the highly acclaimed book "Strength in What Remains," which is the story of a young man who escaped the conflict in Burundi, which neighbors Rwanda, which has its own history of genocide, came to the United States, made it to Harvard University, and then went back to Burundi and set up a free clinic called Global Health Works. That's kind of a model for what can be done in Africa, especially by people who've left Africa and who hear the call to go back. So we're doing that. We're doing a lot of things with all of the different genocides. We've got an exhibit at the Grout Museum of History and Science in Waterloo, an exhibit that comes from St. Louis on the Bosnian genocide. And that was created in this country and in Bosnia by Bosnians and non-Bosnians. We just had on April 15th a 20th anniversary remembrance of the Rwandan genocide of 1994. We are in the early planning stages with the Jewish Federation of the Quad Cities to do some kind of programming next year for the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, which many people still consider the forgotten genocide. So we're really trying to raise awareness about all of these genocides that, in some sense, were the product of the way in which the previous genocides were handled, the way in which the previous genocides were, remembered or not remembered. So we're trying to do as much as we can on as many different fronts as we can.
And because we do so much work with Sudan and South Sudan, we're now having the major issues in South Sudan. And, the tribal warfare there, a lot of people are saying now reminds them of what happened in Rwanda and in the early days before the genocide started, but that certainly you have sporadic bouts of extreme violence in localized parts of the country, and you have political problems and any number of other things. And are you finding any focus on South Sudan right now? Or I'm kind of at a loss on how to respond at the moment, and we're spending a good bit of time trying to discuss it out at different levels, but trying to figure out how to actually program and to try to figure out what to advocate for seems to be problematic. I don't know. Are you finding that? Are you able to do any kind of programming centered around what's going on there right now?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and I'll answer your question, then segue into another crisis in Africa. Last week, a week ago Wednesday, we had a Holocaust survivor and author as this year's speaker at our annual Holocaust Remembrance and Education Lecture. It's called the Norman Cohn Family Remembrance and Education Lecture, and it's named for a prominent family with roots in Waterloo that has funded this lecture series for the last 6 years. And the speaker, absolutely wonderful speaker by the name of Beatrice Muchman, who's very closely connected with the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and who survived the Holocaust as a visibly hidden child in Belgium, which means she was out in the open, being raised as a young Catholic girl. Actually brought up the events of last week in South Sudan, and her point was that the way to honor her own parents who didn't make it through the Holocaust, and the way to honor everyone, victims and survivors of the Holocaust, is to keep our minds on the crises of our own times, and to make it our responsibility to act in the ways that we would have liked more people to respond back in the 1930s and 40s. The difficulty, as you point out, is that it's very difficult to know exactly what's going on. I mean, we know about some of the most horrendous atrocities, but it's really difficult to put things in context and to know exactly what to say about what we hear. The UN representative for the Secretary General, who just visited South Sudan, pledged not to let South Sudan become another Rwanda, and that's good to hear. Of course, the devil's in the details. What exactly is going to be done? But one of the things that we talked about at our Holocaust Remembrance Ceremony Tuesday night is that last year, when we had the 2013 Days of Remembrance ceremony, no one in the audience had heard anything about the recent takeover of power in the Central African Republic. Muslim insurgent group had taken power and installed the first Muslim president in the Central African Republic, which had had decades, almost since independence, of corrupt mismanagement.
The Sudan-backed government of Central African Republic.
Yeah, Central African Republic. And what we've witnessed this year, especially since early November of 2013, is a kind of Rwanda in slow motion. And I know that image has been used about Darfur, but this really is a sort of laboratory case. I hate to use the expression, but I mean it has been possible to watch this crisis unfold and to watch the response to it and to see, what's been done that hasn't been effective and what's been done that has seemed to be effective, and really, unfortunately, at the cost of terrible, terrible suffering and loss of life, to see if we can get it a little bit better this time in terms of effective peacekeeping forces, in terms of the use of sanctions, in terms of the use of humanitarian relief agencies, in terms of an effective use of the media, to see if we can do something to minimize the damage. And on the one hand, I think there are hopeful signs. I think the response of the UN, following the initial response by France to send in peacekeepers to assist the African Union force that was there, I think the response has been a lot better than in crises in the past. But it hasn't been 100% effective. I mean, just yesterday there was a report of attacks on Doctors Without Borders, and 3 members of that absolutely key humanitarian relief agency, 3 members of that organization were killed. So, I think, unfortunately, we have a chance to see if we can put to better use the resources that we have today, to see if the new doctrine of the UN, responsibility to protect, can really be made into an effective tool to save lives and to reduce suffering. It's unfortunate that the laboratory experiment has to involve, human beings, but I think that's where we are.
Stephen, can you speak to the point of where the intersection between politics and realities lie in all this? Meaning, you have the U.S. Holocaust Museum, which is more than a museum. It becomes an advocacy agency at a certain juncture.
Mm-hmm.
And insofar as it does that, it crosses boundaries with politics and finds oneself dealing with issues that are either not very popular or are not the prevailing concerns of governments.
Yeah, well, that's always the problem. That in the end, it's governments and sort of pan-governmental agencies that have to do the work. I mean, the UN has a frankly terrible record in responding to genocide and other atrocity crimes, and its performance in Bosnia and Rwanda kind of set a standard for how not to respond to these crises. But I think all of us are in the business of looking for hopeful signs and seeing the points of light instead of the sort of the all-encompassing darkness. And I mean, the Holocaust Museum has really taken the lead in pushing our government and other governments to make genocide prevention a priority and not simply make genocide intervention the sort of standard form of response. The most important document that guides the UN today in terms of responding to atrocity crimes, genocide in particular, was produced by a task force organized by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. The museum's Committee on Conscience, which was one of the early commitments to go beyond Holocaust remembrance in education, is a very, very important initiative operating along with advocacy groups and NGOs of various kinds. But in the end, it's governments that have to commit resources, that have to commit peacekeeping troops, that have to apply sanctions, that have to build coalitions. And, here I think there's still a lot of disappointment, at least from my perspective.
Who is it that you depend upon for information on how best to work with, for instance, the U.S. State Department? Well,
we don't have, and I dare say that none of the other centers for Holocaust and genocide education have any direct access to the State Department. I think our best connections are with the Holocaust Memorial Museum and with various advocacy groups like United to End Genocide, the Enough Project, Prevent Genocide International, and I'm just naming the ones that come immediately to mind, to work with them to try to promote awareness. Our mission is to serve the state of Iowa. And so our first concern is, who can we partner with in the state? Jewish federations, other faith-based organizations, schools, other colleges and universities, civic groups like the United Nations Association. Who can we partner with to make our work get the widest possible attention and audience? So that's my primary concern. How do we build this kind of awareness in the state?
David, let me ask you to tell us a little bit about interactions with, for instance, people in the State Department.
Well, there have been a lot of attempts to get the State Department to engage on Sudan and South Sudan. And there's a limited amount of ability that we have to do that. One, the resources that the United States wants to commit to dealing with Africa in general tend to be, let's talk to the UN and see what we can get the UN to do, which amounts to most often nothing, which is why Samantha Power is pulling her hair out on the Security Council, because a lot of the time she's having enough trouble getting the United States to advocate for something, but once she gets the United States government to advocate for something, the Russians or Chinese or somebody else are going to be blocking it. So this is part of why not only is the United Nations response to genocide in Africa pretty pathetic, but that means that our response as the United States is even more pathetic, because our response tends to be, let's go through the UN. The State Department also has an issue of this. There was a foreign policy in place during the Bush administration to oppose the Muslim Brotherhood governments. Then the Obama administration came in trying to reach out to the Muslim Brotherhood governments, and now the Muslim Brotherhood is on the outs, particularly with the collapse of the Muslim Brotherhood leadership in Egypt. So throughout Africa, this has had a huge impact. And a lot of different countries are completely up in the air. And the State Department has to try to figure out how to handle all of these basically collapsed relationships. it's really difficult. They believe that that we need to engage, but they're having trouble convincing people to engage. If we can't engage with Syria, for example, and actually do something to stop in a conflict where we know that well into six figures of people have been killed in that conflict, we're not going to be able to stop much.
Yeah. Stephen, let me get back to you on the issue of interfaith cooperation in terms of teaching about the Holocaust and commemorating the Holocaust. What's been your experience, sir?
Well, my own experience has been very good. We've held a lot of events at churches. We've had panel discussions in conjunction with exhibits and film screenings that have brought together rabbis, Christian clergy, and imam from the very large Islamic center in Waterloo. Of course, we would like to do more, but people have been very responsive. If I could just go back a moment to our annual Holocaust Remembrance Ceremony, we made it, and I say we, I mean Sons of Jacob Synagogue, the UNI committee that preceded the center, some of our other partners. We made it an absolute priority when we first thought about having an annual ceremony that this be a community event and that it be an interfaith event. And that's why we've never had it at the synagogue. We had it one year at a Lutheran church, but every other year we've had it either on the UNI campus or more often at some civic building like an arts center or a museum or something like that. Because we really want the ceremony to be perceived as a community commemoration that brings together people of different faiths, and that's why we always have an invocation and benediction delivered by members of the Christian clergy. That's why we focus our publicity efforts on as many different constituencies in our metropolitan area as possible. And I think we have given the ceremony an identity as an interfaith commemoration. We could certainly be doing more, and I know that this is something on your minds as well. How to get Holocaust remembrance and Holocaust education to be perceived as something, not so much parochial, but of, interest to everyone in the wider community. Yeah. If I'm interpreting what you said correctly.
Yes. A couple of more quick questions. There's an exhibit at the University of Iowa that's about to open about the White Rose.
Yeah.
Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, this exhibit, which was created in Munich, which is the home of the White Rose Foundation, which is where this remarkable resistance effort took place for the most part. This White Rose exhibit, which in its German version is constantly traveling around Germany and being seen by tens of thousands of school children every year, also has an English language version that travels around the States. And 2 years ago, it was at the German American Heritage Center in Davenport. And then last year, it was at the Grout Museum of History and Science in Waterloo. We collaborate with the Grout Museum and bring an exhibit every year to that museum. And so last year, we brought the center brought the White Rose exhibit to the Grout Museum. And this tonight is the opening of the White Rose exhibit in the School of Public Health at the University of Iowa, which is on North Riverside Drive. And there's an opening reception tonight, and the exhibit is about this group of young people. I mean, people in their early 20s, most notably a brother and sister by the name of Hans and Sophie Scholl, and some of their fellow students at Munich's most prestigious university, and one of their professors, who, beginning in 1942, began distributing leaflets anonymously, calling upon the German people to work for the overthrow of the Nazi government. The group was all arrested in February of 1943 after Hans and Sophie Scholl were discovered throwing leaflets onto the floor of the atrium of the main university building. And like other resistance groups, the punishment was swift and extreme. Virtually all of the members of the group were executed. And so the exhibit is about this remarkable group of young people who, under the most dangerous conditions, and tried to awake the conscience of their fellow Germans. And, it's not so much about the Holocaust, although several of the members of this group spent 3 months on the Russian front in the summer and fall of 1942 and witnessed some of the atrocities that the German army was carrying out against Jews in Russia, the Jews who were still alive. And so they were very, very sensitive to what was happening. They knew about the camps. Some of them had, really become opponents of the regime as early as Kristallnacht, when they saw what was happening to their fellow students and fellow German citizens. And so it's a remarkable story. It's a story of a remarkable group of people who did what most people didn't have the courage to do, didn't have the vision to do. And I hope that anyone who hasn't seen this exhibit will, if it's at all possible, go over to Iowa City and have a look at it. It's one of the stories that makes you that gives you a lot of faith in young people in particular who speak out against all odds. So that's what's opening up in Iowa City. Yeah.
Okay. My final question has to do with the prospect of the Iowa Council for Holocaust Education putting on a webinar for the first time, provided we get enough people subscribing to it. Stephen, you and Professor Harry Broad will be the clinicians for that. What do you intend to share with recipients?
Well, both of us teach Mouse, which is certainly one of the most important, I'm going to say, pieces of writing. It's a graphic novel, 2-volume graphic novel, one of the most important forms of testimony about the Holocaust. I teach it every semester in my Holocaust literature class, and I also teach it on a more limited basis in my genocide studies classes. Harry deals with it in his humanities class, and of course, Harry, as the child of Holocaust survivors, has a special connection with Mouse that I don't have. For those who aren't familiar with Mouse, it was produced by the son of Holocaust survivors on the basis of that person's, Art Spiegelman's, experience growing up in the home of Holocaust survivors, as well as on the basis of lengthy interviews that he conducted with his father in the 1970s and in the very early 80s, and eventually produced as a 2-volume graphic novel, the first volume published in 1986, the second one in 1991. There's really nothing like it. It's an extraordinary testimony, not just of the story of survival of two people who lived through the Holocaust, his parents, but also it's the story of how a child of Holocaust survivors comes to terms with who he is, what it means to be the child of survivors. And it's also the story of the struggle to create testimony about the Holocaust, because you get a glimpse into the often difficult creative process that Art Spiegelman went through over more than a decade. This was a work that was almost 2 decades in the making. And you get a sort of honest portrayal of the challenges of representing the Holocaust that I think in many ways is unparalleled. So a lot of teachers introduce their students to Maus. We'd like to talk to them about, what they might consider doing in introducing this work. And it's just really an extraordinary document of the Holocaust. And I hope that people will be interested in talking about their perceptions of it, what they do with it, what they'd like to know about it. And, of course, you've been the driving force in this first venture into a webinar. So we have our fingers crossed.
Yeah, the webinar will be on the internet on May 20th from 6 to 7 p.m. Central Time. People interested in this should Google the Facebook page of the Iowa Holocaust Memorial, and there will be information on that page to direct people to register for the webinar.
Dr. Gaies, we only have a couple more minutes left, but I wanted to ask you, what does the center do, and what's the challenge of the fact that there are very few Holocaust survivors left now, and obviously there soon, over the next decade or so, won't be more. What's the challenge that you face in dealing with Holocaust studies in that respect?
That's a great question, because I think that's probably the most frequent question that comes up among people like ourselves, who are interested in Holocaust education. How are things going to change when the last of the survivors, the last of the living links to this event, have passed away? We're not there yet. I mean, the speaker whom we had on April 23rd is just past 80. She was born in 1933, the same year that Hitler came to power. So she's just 80 years old. But we know that we're in the last generation during which people will have a chance to see living Holocaust survivors. And so how is it going to change? Is it going to be possible to use visual histories of the kind that the Shoah Visual Institute, created by Steven Spielberg, has assembled? Some 57,000 testimonies. Is that going to be the same or an adequate replacement for that face-to-face contact with Holocaust survivors? I don't think anyone knows the answer to that question. It's certainly difficult to teach. It's more difficult to teach the Armenian genocide, which I do every semester, not having any living survivors. Well, there are a few, but really not having them available to bring to campus. So I don't know. I mean, what are your feelings about that? Is it going to make a qualitative difference in how we try to preserve the memory of the Holocaust, how we try to make people connect with that event?
Well, I, from my perspective, I think it'll change it significantly. I think that's part of why we reach out and use people in our educational programs who've experienced other genocides, so that people can see, a survivor of Darfuri genocide, for example, as somebody who survived a genocide. But I think that things like the Spielberg Foundation and all the recordings are going to end up being the basis for what we do in educating on the Holocaust. And the big challenge over the next couple of decades, I think, is going to be sifting through that material to find the best stuff for us to use. We're running out of time. I'd like to thank Dr. Stephen Gaies for joining us today on Rabbi Kaufman's Understanding the World. And next week on the show, we have Richard Miniter, author of Eyes on Target and a number of other studies in American foreign policy and the use of military. So we will see you next week. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and happy Israel Independence Day.